In this talk, we're going to learn about the development in animals. Reproduction is an important process that allows the population to outlive its members. Reproduction involves the generation of new individuals from existing ones. Some animals are able to reproduce asexually, while others reproduce sexually. When multicellular organisms undergo sexual reproduction, the resulting progeny has to go through the process of development in order to form a fully functional organism. Sexual reproduction is the process by which haploid gametes, which are usually the sperm and the egg, fuse to form a diploid single-celled zygote. This zygote will undergo many rounds of cell divisions and progressive changes to ultimately form a fully functional multicellular organism that can reproduce. The different changes that are occurring in the zygote in order to form the adult organism comes under the realm of development. Animals go through different stages of development. Let us start with the fertilization stage. In this stage, the gametes will fuse to form a zygote. The diploid zygote then undergoes many rounds of mitosis in the stage of cleavage. By the end of cleavage, a blastula is formed. The cells that form the blastula then undergo a migration process during the stage of gastrulation. This migration aids in the formation of the germ layers. Once the germ layers are formed, the germ layers can give rise to different organs that are needed for survival. At the end of organogenesis, the organism is born. In some animals, the organism that is born has to undergo many different changes before becoming an adult. This occurs in the stage of metamorphosis. Whether the animal undergoes metamorphosis or not, after birth, it still needs to grow and attain sexual maturity. Once it attains sexual maturity, the organism is capable of forming gametes. The formation of gametes occurs through the process of gametogenesis. Once the animal is able to make gametes, it is capable of sexual reproduction, where the gametes can fuse to form a diploid zygote, and the process continues. In animals, gametes are formed in reproductive structures. Once the diploid zygote is formed, the process of cleavage begins. In this process, the zygote undergoes many rounds of mitosis in order to become multicellular. The cells formed are called as blastomeres. One unique phenomenon of cleavage is that even though many more cells are being produced through cell division, there is no change in the overall size of the organism compared to how it was when it was a zygote. The ball of cells that are initially formed during cleavage is called as a morula. Towards the end of cleavage, a fluid-filled cavity called as the blastocele is formed. And when such a phenomenon occurs, the organism is called as a blastula. The formation of the blastocele provides a space to allow the cells to start moving, which occurs during the process of gastrulation. Gastrulation occurs only in animals, and even though plants and fungi are multicellular, we do not see the phenomenon of gastrulation in their development. Gastrulation is the stage where the germ layers are formed. These germ layers are formed due to the migration of the blastomeres to different regions in the developing embryo. The germ layers that are formed in triploblastic organisms include the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. In the case of diploblastic organisms, only two germ layers are formed, which are the ectoderm and the endoderm. The blastomeres have to migrate in certain ways in order to form the germ layers during gastrulation. The cells that migrate to the interior of the blastula are the ones that will form the mesoderm and the endoderm, while the outer cells will form the ectoderm. The migration of the blastomeres usually creates an opening called as a blastopore. We're able to see that in the figure also, which shows progressive stages of gastrulation, where we can ultimately see an opening, which is the blastopore. If that blastopore forms the mouth, then an organism is a protostome. And in the figure, we are seeing the development of a snail, which is a protostome, and hence the blastopore will form the mouth. In other types of animals, like humans, the blastopore that is formed during development ends up becoming the anus of the organism. In the figure, we are seeing the formation of the blastopore in sea urchins. Once the germ layers are formed, the stage of organogenesis can begin, where organs are formed. All animals have different organs, and hence it is vital that these structures form properly. Usually, the first tissue that is formed that leads to organogenesis is the notochord, which is a rod of tissues. The notochord sends signals to different cells in order to form the nervous system. This usually begins during the formation of a neural tube, which will eventually form the nervous system. Thus, the process of neurulation, where the neural tube is formed, is usually the first event in organogenesis. As organogenesis proceeds, in the case of vertebrates, somites, which are segmented blocks of tissue, are formed. We are able to see the dark lines of the somites being formed in the figure. Somite formation is important because it aids in the formation of different types of body parts, which include skeletal muscle, cartilage, vertebrae, so on and so forth. Other types of organs can also form from the germ layers, and once the organogenesis is complete, the organism is born. In some animals, once the organism is born, it has to undergo many changes to form an adult. This can be observed in vertebrates like amphibians, where a tadpole is present, which has to undergo a series of changes before the adult frog can be formed. Many invertebrates also show metamorphosis, and a very common example is that of the butterfly. In metamorphosis, the organism goes through many different stages before the adult stage is attained. There are two main types of metamorphosis. The simple or incomplete or hemimetabolous metamorphosis occurs when the young look like wingless adults. This is normally seen in insects like grasshoppers. And in this case, the young gradually produce wing buds and larger wings as they go through different stages. The stages in incomplete metamorphosis normally starts off where the egg hatches to give rise to a nymph. These nymphs mature and ultimately form an adult. The other type of metamorphosis is complete or holometabolous metamorphosis. In this case, the young look very different from the adults. They can have separate diets and habitats too. The main stages in the complete metamorphosis is when the egg hatches, it forms a larva. In the case of insects, you can have a pupa stage, which ultimately gives rise to an adult. But in vertebrates like frogs, the pupa stage is usually not present. Whether an organism undergoes metamorphosis or not, it must attain sexual maturity before it has the ability to reproduce. Hence, the sex organs must develop in a way that they're able to produce gametes. The reproductive organs are normally present when the vertebrate is born. However, for further development of the organs to have the ability to produce gametes, Different signals, like those coming from hormones, are required for gamete formation to occur. This usually happens when the organism attains adulthood. With this, we come to the end of our talk, where we learned about the different stages of development that include gametogenesis, fertilization, cleavage, gastrulation, organogenesis, in the case of some animals, metamorphosis, and finally the adult stage.